I stood in the shade of an old oak tree, holding a paper plate loaded with potato salad and a burger that smelled like summer. The air was thick with the scent of charcoal and sunscreen, laughter bubbling from clusters of relatives scattered across my aunt's sprawling lawn in suburban Atlanta. My name is Lieutenant Colonel Laura Thompson, U.S. Army Medical Corps, 48 years old with faint crow's feet from squinting at patient charts during long shifts. That July afternoon in 2023, I thought the family barbecue was just another obligatory gathering. I had no idea it would become the day my hidden life stepped into the sunlight. My family had always been the type to turn any holiday into a feast. Memorial Day, 4th of July, even Labor Day meant grills firing up and coolers stocked with soda and beer. This one was for my cousin's birthday, a casual affair with kids chasing frisbees and uncles debating football stats. I'd driven down from Fort Bragg, opting for jeans and a simple blouse instead of anything that screamed military. Blending in had become my habit around them. My dad, Harold, was holding court by the grill, spatula in hand like a scepter. At 75, he was still the family patriarch, quick with a joke and even quicker to poke fun at anyone who didn't fit his idea of pulling their weight. He'd been a factory supervisor for 40 years, the kind of man who measured people by how hard they worked, or at least how hard he thought they worked. Growing up, his barbs had always found me, the dreamy daughter who read books instead of joining sports teams. "Laura's the one who sits around all day," he'd say with a wink, as if it was harmless. But it stung, especially since he never knew the half of what I did. I joined the Army at 22, right after nursing school, seeking structure after a messy college breakup. He thought it was a whim, that I'd quit after basic. Instead, I thrived. Deployments to field hospitals, leading teams through chaos, earning promotions quietly. But I never paraded it. Why give him more ammunition? The afternoon wore on with games of cornhole and kids splashing in a kiddie pool. I chatted with aunts about recipes, avoiding deeper questions. Then, as the sun dipped lower, Dad called everyone over for a toast to the birthday boy. His voice boomed across the yard, drawing eyes. "And let's not forget Laura here," he added, gesturing at me with his beer can. "My girl who could sleep through a hurricane. Lazy bones, am I right?" The relatives chuckled politely, the sound like nails on a chalkboard to me. I forced a smile, my cheeks burning. Part of me wanted to vanish, but then I noticed 3 guys near the picnic table, tall, fit men in casual polos and shorts. They were friends of my cousin from his college days, or so I'd thought. One of them, with a buzz cut and a tattoo peeking from his sleeve, cleared his throat. "Actually, sir," he said firmly, "she's our boss." Looking back, that barbecue was the culmination of years of unspoken tensions. I grew up in a modest ranch house on the outskirts of Macon, Georgia, where the summers were sticky and the winters mild enough to forget. Dad ran the household like his factory shift, everything on schedule, no room for lazing about. Mom, a quiet schoolteacher, buffered his sharpness with hugs and homemade pies, but she passed when I was 25, leaving me to navigate him alone. As a kid, I was the middle child, sandwiched between an older brother who excelled at baseball and a younger sister who charmed everyone with her chatter. I was the reader, the one who'd lose track of time in the library. "Laura's head's in the clouds again," Dad would tease at dinner, his laughter echoing off the walls. It wasn't mean-spirited at first, but over time, it chipped away. By high school, I avoided family outings, preferring solo runs along the river trails. College was my escape, nursing school at Georgia State, where I discovered I thrived under pressure. The Army recruiter at a job fair painted a picture of purpose, travel, stability, helping people in real ways. Dad scoffed when I enlisted. "You'll be back in a month, tail between your legs." But basic training forged me, learning to push through exhaustion, bandaging wounds under simulated fire. I found a family in uniform, one that valued my steady hands and calm demeanor. Deployments followed, a year in a mobile hospital in Kuwait, patching up soldiers with everything from sprains to shrapnel wounds. I rose to captain, then major, leading nursing teams with quiet efficiency. Medals came, a bronze star for a chaotic evac under fire, but I tucked them away. Home visits meant civilian clothes, vague answers about office work. Dad never probed. He assumed I was coasting. It was easier that way. No arguments, no disappointments. By my 40s, I'd pinned on Lieutenant Colonel, overseeing a medical unit at Fort Bragg. My life was charts, briefings, and the satisfaction of seeing patients heal. But family gatherings? They were minefields. Dad's jabs had evolved. Laura's probably napping on the job. I'd laugh it off, but inside, it festered. That barbecue, though, changed the script. The day began with that familiar buzz of family energy, the kind that makes you feel both connected and a little overwhelmed. I pulled up to my aunt's house early, around noon, parking my old SUV on the grass verge to avoid blocking the driveway. The backyard was already alive with preparations, tables covered in red-checkered cloths, coolers brimming with ice, and the faint sizzle of the grill warming up. I jumped right in to help, climbing a stepladder to string twinkling fairy lights between the oak trees, their branches heavy with summer leaves. My aunts bustled around, unpacking Tupperware filled with coleslaw, baked beans, and Aunt Mary's famous deviled eggs, chatting about recipes and who was bringing what. Kids darted everywhere, their high-pitched shrieks mixing with the distant bark of the neighbor's dog. My little nieces and nephews chased each other with water guns, splashing puddles on the lawn that turned the grass slick and muddy. My cousin Jake, the birthday boy turning 40, stood in the middle of it all, grinning ear to ear as relatives slapped him on the back and teased him about getting old. 40 ain't nothing but a number, he laughed, hugging his wife who balanced a tray of cupcakes. That's when I noticed the 3 guys arriving, carrying a big cooler between them. They looked fit and easygoing in their polos and shorts, blending right in with the crowd as they set the drinks down and shook hands with Jake. I didn't recognize them at first glance. It had been a good 5 years since our paths last crossed. They were part of a group I'd supervised as head nurse during an intense training rotation at Fort Bragg. Back then, I'd drilled them on emergency protocols, making sure they could handle anything from triage in a tent to evacuating under pressure. Apparently, they'd stayed friends with Jake after he casually mentioned our family connection at a barbecue years ago, but they'd never breathed a word about knowing me professionally. "Out of respect for your privacy, ma'am," one of them told me later. It was a small world, but I appreciated their discretion. As more guests trickled in, cousins from out of town, old family friends, the crowd swelled to about 50 people. Dad took his usual spot as grill master, flipping burgers and hot dogs with dramatic flair, his apron stained from years of use. "Who's ready for some chow? These burgers are gonna melt in your mouth," he bellowed across the yard, earning a round of cheers and whoops from the uncles. I mingled as best I could, catching up with relatives I only saw at these gatherings. Uncle Bob pulled me into a bear hug. "Laura, still flying solo? When you gonna settle down?" he asked with a wink, his bushy mustache twitching. I chuckled lightly. "Army life keeps me on my toes. Too busy for much else right now," I replied vaguely, not wanting to dive into details. The truth was, I'd gone on a few dates here and there, but commanding a medical unit meant long hours and constant readiness, leaving little room for romance. Dad must have overheard from the grill because he piped up loudly, "Yeah, Laura's too busy daydreaming to bother with dating. Always has her head in the clouds, that one." A smattering of light laughter rippled through the nearby group, the kind that stings because it's familiar. It grated on me, like sandpaper on old wounds, but I forced a polite smile and excused myself. "Gonna grab some more ice for the drinks," I said, weaving through the crowd. As I passed the picnic table, one of the 3 men, the one with kind brown eyes and a slight limp from an old knee injury he'd gotten during drills, nodded politely at me. I smiled back, still oblivious to who he was, thinking he was just another of Jake's buddies. As the sun began to dip toward evening, casting long shadows across the yard, the group naturally gathered around for the cake cutting. Jake blew out his candles amid cheers, and everyone clapped. Dad, always the showman who loved stealing the spotlight, spotted the karaoke microphone on a nearby table and grabbed it like it was his cue. "All right, folks, time for a few words from the old man," he announced, his voice booming through the speaker. His toast started off warm and genuine, praising Jake for being a great dad and husband. "You've made us all proud, son," he said heartily. But then, as he often did, it veered off track. He turned toward me with that mischievous grin. "And let's not forget Laura over here. She's the family slacker, always finding ways to take it easy. That's probably why she still looks like a kid at her age. No stress lines from hard work." The chuckles from the relatives hit me like a swarm of bees, sharp and persistent. I stared down at my plate, fork frozen in hand, willing the moment to just pass without escalating. My cheeks flushed hot, and I could feel eyes on me. But before I could say anything, the guy with the buzz cut stood up from the picnic table, his posture straight and confident. His voice cut through the air, clear and respectful. "With all due respect, sir, Colonel Thompson runs our entire medical unit like a well-oiled machine. She's no slacker. She's the one who keeps everything together under pressure." In that instant, the entire backyard seemed to hold its breath. The cheerful chatter faded away, replaced by a stunned silence that made even the kids pause their games, looking around curiously with wide eyes. Forks hovered mid-air over plates of half-eaten burgers and salads, and a few relatives exchanged puzzled glances, wondering if they'd heard right. Dad stood frozen by the grill, his confident grin slowly crumbling like overcooked charcoal. He blinked a couple of times, processing the words, and muttered under his breath, "What now? What's this all about?" His voice carried a mix of confusion and defensiveness, as if he couldn't quite believe someone was challenging his light-hearted jab. The man who had spoken, the one with the buzz cut and the tattoo on his arm, didn't back down. He kept his tone steady and respectful, like he was reporting facts in a briefing room. "We served under her command at Fort Bragg, sir," he explained clearly, making sure everyone could hear. "Colonel Thompson led our medical team through some of the toughest training exercises you can imagine. She kept us all sharp, drilling us on procedures until we could handle emergencies in our sleep. Without her guidance, we wouldn't have made it through half of those simulations." His two buddies nodded in agreement, standing a bit straighter now, their faces serious but supportive. One of them, the guy with the kind brown eyes and the slight limp, chimed in to elaborate. "Ma'am's the best leader we've ever had," he said earnestly. "She saved our hides more times than we can count with her quick thinking and calm under pressure. Like that time in a mock battlefield scenario, she spotted a potential hazard before anyone else and redirected the whole team, preventing what could have been a total disaster." Whispers rippled through the relatives like a gentle breeze stirring the leaves overhead. Eyes widened in surprise, and I saw my cousin Jake's jaw literally drop open. He'd known these guys for years through college hangouts, but he clearly had no idea about the full extent of our professional connection. "Wait, seriously?" he murmured to his wife, who just shrugged, equally baffled. Dad's face turned a deep shade of red, matching the ketchup bottle on the table, and he absent-mindedly set down his spatula on the grill's edge, forgetting about the sizzling patties. "You mean, she's your military boss? Like, in charge?" he stammered, his words tumbling out awkwardly as the reality sank in. He looked at me with a mix of shock and something almost like disbelief, as if piecing together a puzzle he'd never bothered to solve. I met his gaze steadily, keeping my voice calm and even, without a hint of anger or triumph. "Yes, Dad," I said simply. "I'm a lieutenant colonel in the Army Medical Corps. I oversee nursing teams, handle deployments, and make sure our soldiers get the care they need." The words hung in the air like the smoke from the grill, simple on the surface but carrying the weight of years unspoken, seismic in their quiet revelation, shifting the ground under everyone's feet. The three soldiers, Sergeant Reyes with his steady limp from that old training injury, Corporal Jenkins with the buzz cut and easy smile, and Private First Class Lee, the youngest with a quiet intensity, stood a little taller now, their casual barbecue outfits suddenly seeming out of place against the discipline radiating from them. Reyes, stepping forward slightly, shared a quick but vivid story to drive the point home. "Remember that field exercise a few years back, ma'am?" he said, turning to me briefly before addressing the group. A massive storm rolled in out of nowhere, turning the training ground into a mud pit with zero visibility. Colonel Thompson organized the evacuation on the spot. She coordinated the teams, prioritized the injured, and made sure not a single person got left behind in the chaos. She's the reason we're all standing here today, safe and sound. There was no exaggeration, no added drama, just straightforward facts delivered with genuine respect, letting the truth speak for itself. Aunties gasped audibly, hands flying to their mouths in surprise, while uncles shifted uncomfortably in their lawn chairs, unsure where to look. A few cousins pulled out their phones, as if ready to Google for confirmation. Dad sputtered again, struggling to find his footing. "Well, I didn't know any of that," he admitted finally, his voice softer now, laced with a hint of embarrassment. The earlier laughter had vanished completely, replaced by an awkward, heavy silence that blanketed the yard like a sudden cloud cover. I didn't gloat or rub it in. I simply nodded at my former soldiers, a small smile breaking through. "Thanks, fellas. I appreciate you speaking up." In that moment, the power dynamic shifted not through angry shouts or dramatic confrontations, but through the plain, undeniable truth spoken out loud, reshaping how everyone saw me, and perhaps how Dad saw himself. After that pivotal moment by the grill, the barbecue slowly picked back up, but the atmosphere had undeniably shifted, like a sudden breeze changing the direction of smoke from the fire. The easygoing laughter from earlier felt forced now, and conversations restarted in hushed tones, with relatives stealing glances my way as if seeing me for the first time. People began approaching me one by one, their expressions a mix of curiosity and newfound respect, almost like they were meeting a stranger at their own family event. "Laura, you're really a colonel? That's incredible. Tell us more," one of my cousins exclaimed, her eyes wide with genuine surprise as she set down her plate of watermelon slices. I smiled modestly, downplaying it as I always had. "It's just part of the job, really. I oversee medical teams, make sure everything runs smoothly during training and deployments. But inside, it felt good to finally share a piece of my world without the weight of judgment hanging over it." Dad lingered near the grill for a while longer, flipping the last few hot dogs absent-mindedly, his usual loud bluster completely deflated like a balloon losing air. He avoided eye contact, busying himself with stacking plates or refilling the charcoal, clearly processing the revelation in his own gruff way. Meanwhile, the three soldiers, Sergeant Reyes, Corporal Jenkins, and Private First Class Lee, mingled effortlessly with the relatives, chatting casually, but sharing just enough light stories to highlight my capabilities without turning it into a brag session. "You should have seen Colonel Thompson during that hurricane simulation last year," Jenkins said to a group of uncles gathered around the cooler. "Winds howling, rain pouring, and she's out there directing the medics, ensuring every casualty got triaged right. Kept us all focused, no panic, just results." The uncles nodded appreciatively, one muttering, "Well, I'll be damned. Never knew." As dusk settled in, the string lights we'd hung earlier flickered on automatically, casting a warm, golden glow over the yard like scattered stars. The kids, completely oblivious to the adult drama, gathered around a small fire pit to roast marshmallows, their giggles piercing the evening air as sticky fingers pulled gooey treats from sticks. My sister Karen pulled me aside near the edge of the lawn, away from the main crowd, her brow furrowed with a mix of confusion and concern. "Laura, why didn't you ever tell us more about all this? We had no idea you were leading teams like that. Deployments, promotions, the whole thing." I shrugged, glancing at the fireflies starting to dance in the twilight. "I guess I didn't want the fuss or the questions. Dad's always been quick to tease, and I figured it was easier to keep it low-key." The truth was deeper, of course. I'd hidden it to shield myself from his constant judgment, building a wall to protect the part of my life where I felt truly valued. But now, with everything out in the open, the air between us all felt lighter, like a long-held breath finally released. Eventually, as the crowd thinned and people started packing up lawn chairs, Dad wandered over to me, a fresh beer clutched in his hand like a crutch. He cleared his throat awkwardly, staring at the ground before meeting my eyes. "Look, Laura, I didn't mean to, make it sound like that earlier. I was just joking around, but I guess I didn't realize." His words trailed off. Not quite a full apology, but it was a start, the closest he'd come in years to admitting he'd crossed a line. I nodded slowly, giving him a small, understanding smile. "I know, Dad. It's okay. We can talk about it more later." We stood there side by side for a few quiet minutes, watching the fireflies flicker in the growing darkness, the hum of crickets filling the silence between us. It wasn't a grand reconciliation, but it felt like the beginning of something real. Before heading out, the soldiers approached me one last time, snapping subtle salutes that blended into casual waves so as not to draw too much attention. "Ma'am, it was an honor to set the record straight," Reyes said softly, his limp barely noticeable as he shifted his weight. "You've always had our backs. Figured it was time we had yours." Their quiet affirmation warmed me more than the fire pit ever could, a reminder that respect earned in the field carried far beyond the base. As they drove off, the yard felt a little emptier, but my heart a little fuller. In the days following the barbecue, my phone buzzed nonstop with texts and calls from relatives, each one carrying a tone of surprise mixed with genuine pride that I hadn't heard from them before. "Laura, we had no idea about your accomplishments. Congratulations on being a colonel," one aunt wrote, followed by emojis of clapping hands and American flags. Another cousin called, his voice excited. "Hey, sis, that was eye-opening. You've been kicking butt all this time. Tell me more sometime." It was overwhelming but heartwarming, like a dam breaking after years of holding back the full story of my life. I replied graciously, keeping things light, but it felt good to finally be seen beyond the family gatherings. About a week later, Dad surprised me with a call while I was driving home from the base. His voice was gruff as always, but there was a hesitation I wasn't used to. "Laura, you free this weekend? Come over for dinner. I'll fry up some chicken. Your favorite." I paused, sensing this was his olive branch, and agreed. That Saturday evening, I pulled into his driveway, the familiar scent of his rose bushes greeting me. We sat at his worn oak kitchen table, plates piled with crispy fried chicken, mashed potatoes, and green beans. From his garden. He poked at his food for a bit before clearing his throat. "So tell me about this work of yours, the Army stuff. What exactly do you do all day?" I took a breath and shared more than I ever had. "Well, Dad, I lead a team of nurses and medics. We handle everything from routine checkups to emergency drills. Last month, we ran a simulation for disaster response, training folks on how to treat injuries in the field. It's demanding, with long shifts and high stakes, but it's rewarding knowing we're keeping soldiers healthy and ready." He listened intently, nodding slowly as he chewed, his eyes fixed on his plate at first, but gradually meeting mine. "Sounds pretty tough," he said finally, his tone softer than usual. "Didn't realize it was like that. Must take a lot out of you." It wasn't a grand apology, but in his own way, he was acknowledging the reality he'd overlooked for so long. Over the next few months, I noticed subtle changes in him. Fewer teasing jabs during phone calls, more genuine questions about my day. "How's the base treating you?" he'd ask. Or, "Any big exercises coming up?" It was gradual, like thawing ice, but it built a bridge we hadn't crossed before. By Thanksgiving, the shift was even clearer. The family gathered at his house, the table groaning under turkey, stuffing, and pies. As we went around introducing guests to newcomers, Dad turned to me with a proud glint in his eye. "And this here's Laura, my daughter. She's in the Army, a lieutenant colonel in the medical corps. Runs the show over at Fort Bragg. There was no fanfare, no over-the-top praise, but the respect in his voice was unmistakable, like he'd finally rewritten his script about me. As for the soldiers, Sergeant Reyes, Corporal Jenkins, and Private First Class Lee, we stayed in touch through occasional texts and emails. "Ma'am, hope all's well after the family reveal," Reyes messaged once, attaching a funny meme about barbecues gone wrong. A few months later, they even visited the base for a quick tour I arranged, where I showed them around the medical facilities. "Still the best CO," Jenkins said with a grin as we wrapped up. Those connections reminded me that mending fences wasn't just about Dad, it was about embracing the full circle of my world. A full year had passed since that unforgettable barbecue, and looking back, it felt like a quiet revolution had taken root in our family. The once tense gatherings now carried a softer edge. Conversations flowed more openly, with fewer awkward pauses or forced jokes. Relatives who'd always seen me as the quiet one now asked thoughtful questions about my work, and even the kids seemed to pick up on the change, proudly telling their friends about their cool army aunt. It wasn't perfect, but the shift was real, like sunlight filtering through clouds after a long storm. Dad, in particular, surprised everyone by joining a local veterans group at the community center. At first, he went reluctantly, dragged along by an old factory buddy who'd served in Vietnam. But soon, he started sharing stories from his own brief stint in the reserves back in the 70s. Nothing dramatic, just everyday tales of camaraderie and discipline. One evening, he called me after a meeting, his voice warmer than usual over the phone. "Laura, you know that group I joined? Met a fella today who was a medic like you. Told him about your drills and such. He said it sounds like tough stuff," made me think. I smiled, hearing the subtle pride creeping in. "That's great, Dad. Sharing helps, right?" He grunted in agreement. "Yeah, guess it does. Makes me see things different now." Professionally, I threw myself deeper into mentoring young nurses at the base, guiding them through simulations and real-world prep, just as I'd been guided early on. Drawing from my own roots, the resilience built from Dad's tough love and Mom's quiet encouragement, I emphasized not just skills, but the human side, staying calm under fire, building team trust. "Remember, it's not about being perfect," I'd tell them during debriefs. "It's about showing up and adapting." One mentee, a fresh-faced lieutenant, pulled me aside after a session. "Ma'am, your stories from the field, they make it real. How do you stay so steady?" I chuckled. "Practice and a good support system, even if it takes time to build." The barbecue itself had become family legend, retold at holidays with a mix of humor and awe. "Remember when those soldiers set Uncle Harold straight?" It marked a turning point, bridging the gaps I'd long felt, turning hidden strengths into shared pride. Life moved forward with new horizons, stronger bonds, deeper understanding, and a sense that truth, once spoken, keeps echoing positively. As I reflect on that barbecue and everything that followed, I've come to see life's deepest lessons often unfold in the most ordinary places, like a simple backyard under Georgia's summer sun. It's not the grand battles or dramatic speeches that define us, but those quiet moments where truth steps forward unannounced. Respect, I've learned, isn't something you demand with a raised voice or a show of force. It's earned through steady actions day after day without needing a spotlight. In my years in the Army, leading teams through chaos and calm, I've seen how true strength whispers rather than roars. It's in the calm decision during a storm drill, the reassuring word to a nervous recruit, or the unspoken bond that holds a unit together. That day taught me, and hopefully my family, that we all carry hidden strengths, forged in the fires of our personal journeys. For me, it was rising through the ranks, from a young nurse patching wounds in the field to a lieutenant colonel overseeing critical medical operations. Dad's teasing had built walls around that part of my life, but when those soldiers spoke up, the walls crumbled, revealing what was always there. Now, our family talks more openly, Dad even shares stories from his veterans group meetings, like the time he said over coffee, "Laura, that medic I met last week, he reminded me of you. Tough as nails, but kind about it. Makes me proud." I nodded, replying, "Thanks, Dad. It's about showing up, every day." Those small exchanges have mended what was broken, turning old hurts into understanding. If this story resonates with you, perhaps because you've hidden your own achievements or faced family doubts, I encourage you to share it. Remind someone, a friend, a child, or even yourself, that hidden strengths have a way of shining exactly when they're needed most. From the peach orchards of Georgia to wherever you are, whether bustling cities or quiet towns, know that your worth doesn't require applause or validation from others. It simply needs you to recognize it, embrace it, and live it out. In the end, quiet strength isn't about being unbreakable. It's about bending without losing your core and rising taller for it.